Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to the second Be Human Project Salon. We're thrilled to have you. And tonight, our special guest is Mr. Dave Gray, who we're really excited to have. And without further ado, I will hand this over to our provocateur, Mr. Chris Reimer.
Thank you. Moderator, MC, that's fine too. The reason I don't sound amplified, this is just for the cameras, so it is on. So I'm Chris Reimer. I'm marketing director at Caldy's Coffee, and I'll be your moderator for tonight. I want to thank you, my friend Eliot, for keeping me involved with this project. It's a real pleasure to be here, and we want to thank Bigwidesky, obviously, as our presenting sponsor. We have other sponsors we want to thank as well: Schlafly Corporation, Caldy's Coffee, Westwood Catering, and Spot Media Production Group has worked their butts off to have all these cameras around so that we can record the nights and use it on our website to further our mission. So we really thank them for all of their hard work. And obviously thanks to Gene and everyone at Bigwidesky for all of the incredibly hard work that they've done to get this space in shape. Sorry if you're a client of Bigwidesky, they haven't been working on your stuff today, I don't think. I think we're going to go, what time is it now, 6:15 or so? I think we're going to go till around 7:30, 7:45 or so, depending on how the conversation is flowing. If you have to take an important call or get a drink or whatever, obviously go ahead and step out. We won't be offended. We're going to have some networking afterwards. We'll stay till 8:30 or 9 or question mark, whatever. So please do stay and hang out with us. We may even get the chance to go up on the roof, which is safe, I presume. And it's going to be a nice night with... all right. Thank you, Mr. Building Owner guy. That's awesome. So we'll go up there a bit later, hopefully. I think it's going to be a nice night, and we really hope that you'll stay with us and hang out afterwards. So we're having this continuing discussion about, I guess, what I would call the intersection of humanity and business. And this is something that I know the three of us care about, and we know that you guys care about it as well because you decided to join us tonight. Some people were here for the first one as well, so again, we're really happy you're here. We want to find out if it's possible to put humans at the center of all of our business decisions, whether they be operational business decisions, business design decisions. We've got you guys here because you're the leaders of St. Louis, and we really want obviously your buy-in. We want your input as well. So as this project progresses, we really want you to stay involved. In fact, we're hoping that there could be a few folks here that could take Dave's seat at a future salon. So I need to introduce, well, I don't need to introduce. Everyone here knows who Eliot is, but I will take a moment to say something. He's the CEO of this company, Bigwidesky, and he is a man frustrated, if we can say, with the business cultures that ignore and exclude humans at the center. He has been working with companies to model a new communications culture in which people simply talk with other people, helping those brands to become more human. In addition to serving as Bigwidesky's leader and futurist, he is a sought-after author and speaker, and speaks on a range of topics, including political science, economics, user-centered design, and media studies. And it was his TED Talk, TEDx Talk, I should say, from earlier this year, called Geese from Bottles, Saving Business by Making It More Human, that really became the springboard for this project. I can say personally that Eliot is one of the nicest people I know, and any new vocabulary I acquire, I usually get it from him. So I want you guys, if you can, to give Eliot a very warm welcome. Thank you. And as Gene said, we're very, very honored to have Mr. Dave Gray with us. He was the founder of the consultancy known as Explain, which was acquired by Dotchess Group in 2010. His current project is BoardThing. It's an online collaboration platform for distributed teams. He serves as a strategic advisor to a select group of clients and delivers keynotes and hands-on workshops on topics related to innovation, culture, and change. And he is the author of 2 books, The latest being the Connected Company, which I believe you guys all received a copy of, and we're loosely here to talk about its contents tonight. He believes that one of the most difficult and yet important aspects of any business transformation is culture change. According to him, quote, "Culture can be a company's best friend, but when volatility in the business environment requires change, culture can actually be the biggest obstacle." And I can say with certainty that he is the tallest person I know that cares about such matters. So if you guys could put your hands together for Mr. Dave Gray. So in just a bit, the three of us and you guys are going to have a discussion about tonight's topic. But we want to start just with a few words from Eliot on what the Be Human Project is. And so can you give us a little bit of background on why you started the project and what it's all about and what we're trying to accomplish here?
Sure. I mentioned at the last Salon that the sort of original catalyst for this was my dad, who is fortunately here tonight. I remember as I mentioned before, I had this really sort of poignant, I have poignant memories of, seeing this man who I view as sort of paragon of virtue, climbing the corporate ladder and being met with responses that were poor and not predicated on merit, and it hurt me, as a kid, seeing this. I had a sense of injustice about this, right? But I didn't know much more than just to feel that it was an injustice. But then, when I grew up and started to work in the corporate world, I saw it all firsthand, and I have this sort of predisposition to imagine that things that others might think are only marginally possible are actually very possible. No, that can happen. And so, as I was mentioning just a few minutes ago, I have what I suspect is maybe what some might feel to be a quixotic belief that business really can be human, and moreover that if business were to become more human, that many of the most profound challenges and pain, some of the most profound pain that we feel now, could be addressed and ameliorated through that process. So that's the impetus for this project, is to find examples of companies, organizations, whether it be very trivial examples or profound examples, where these organizations are becoming more human, and bring awareness to these examples so that business leaders will become emboldened to experiment themselves. They'll say, this can happen, I've seen it happen elsewhere, I can do it as well. I mentioned the diffusion of innovations curve in my TEDx talk about how this research that was done in the 60s among farmers actually discovered that there's this sort of pattern by which new things are adopted. And that pattern is basically that a very small percentage of people, something like 16%, 16.5%, something like that, will adopt something new because either they have created it or they see the vision or they appreciate novelty. Whereas everyone else, the other 84% or whatever of us, will only adopt something new because someone else has, right? And so we want people to know that someone else has adopted human business, that it is happening, and we want leaders to see that and feel that they can do it too. So that is the motivation here, and it is just a profound honor. I mean, I can't express my gratitude for Dave befriending me and coming to be a part of this. When I picked up Dave's book the first time and started reading it, it was deeply discouraging to me because every page I turned, I realized that he had written the book that I wanted to write. And but the more of it I read, the more excited I became, because I realized that I wasn't crazy for thinking these things, that someone else who is very smart is thinking these things as well, and so that he's here is just amazing. So that's the impetus for doing this, and as Chris said, I feel strongly that there are people in this room, and there are many people in the St. Louis community who are both leaders and who want to make their organizations more human, or are making their organizations more human. And I hope that you and they become a deeper part of what we're trying to accomplish here.
Cool. Thank you. It is your turn to give us, it's not a presentation, it's a short discussion.
Don't say musing.
we're not going to say that. Why don't you kind of walk us through your ideas?
Yeah, I want to give us all something, with some substance that we can have a conversation around. I want to introduce a topic, and then hopefully what I would like and what I think we all would like is to engage in a conversation about things that are really going on, and take these things that I'm going to describe from a sort of a theoretical perspective and actually make them real by, connecting them to things that you guys are struggling with or working on, what have you. So I went to design school. I studied art. So I like to draw when I talk. So we have this device here. So can everyone see that in the back? And I'm going to record it as well. So I'm going to click the record button here. And that's for the same reason we have microphones. Posterity. This is going to go in the Museum of Humanity. So this book that some of you have, I think most of you have gotten a copy of, and if you haven't, please let us know and we'll get you a copy, came about because my company was acquired by I had a consulting firm. My background is, I have a design background, so I'm coming from a design perspective, but my whole life has been focused on change and the problems of change, especially in organizations and groups. And Dennis and I were having a conversation earlier. People don't like to change, and people especially don't like to be controlled. And when they feel like they're being controlled and they feel like they're being asked to change at the same time, people just tend not to like that, and they tend to resist. And my company, Explain, I had a theory starting out, coming out of design school. I had worked as a journalist doing information graphics, drawing ideas and explaining things. So the whole idea of Explain was that we were going to explain things. Do I want to change the color scheme to improve performance? No, I don't think so. Keep the current keep the current color scheme and don't show this message again.
That happened in rehearsal too.
So my first thesis was, let's just explain things. People don't like to change. People don't change because they don't understand. So if we can just make things clear, then people will understand. Then they will make better decisions. And then once people understand why it's important and why this change has to happen, then they'll change. And so for many years we did this. We explained things. And guess what? People didn't change. And what happens is that, this is one of my first big learnings, people say they're confused when they understand perfectly well. It's just a politically correct way of saying, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm confused. What are you asking me to do? I don't. It really just means no. It's a way to say no without getting fired for it. I don't understand. I didn't understand. So no matter, and I was getting, really pissing people off, frankly, because I was making things so clear an 8-year-old child could understand it, and they still were trying to find a way to be confused about it. So just learned a lot over many, many years, 30 years, working with organizations about change. And one of the things that this book was really about me becoming acquired, my company becoming acquired by a company that did social technology. That's all about collaboration and being able to, a very simplistic way to describe it would be Facebook in a big organization. So people are seeing what each other's doing, they're commenting, they're connecting to each other. And so being this guy who likes to explain things, I went to the salespeople, and when they tried to describe to me what this company that I now worked for, I was now the senior vice president of strategy. And when the salespeople would try and explain to me what the company did, it made no sense. I couldn't understand a word. And so I started writing this book because I had to explain it to myself, really. What is this? What is a connected company? What is a social business? And actually turns out it became a very fascinating journey for me, because there is something going on today, and I'll just draw this really simple picture of a triangle, and there's a similar picture in the book. But companies have been organized along this kind of pyramidal, hierarchical structure for many, many, many years. And this sort of like you have the stratification vertically and then divisions horizontally. So you have, the whole idea is divide the labor, divide the work, give people each a little piece of the work, and you can be much more efficient. You can just have lots of people doing things much faster and more efficiently. And that's true. That's what we call the Industrial Revolution, right? Division of labor, mass production, interchangeable parts, all that stuff. But that's all predicated on sort of the environment being relatively stable and not changing that much. So as long as things don't change, just like a machine, if you design a blender, as long as people have things they need to blend, this blender is going to be fine, right? But when people start having lots of other things that they want to do, and you've designed a blender, and the things they want to do don't involve blending, then your whole machine becomes kind of obsolete and useless. And this is happening. And we're seeing the bookstore, right? The bookstore is a kind of a machine for getting books from inside people's heads, like me and Eliot and a lot of you in this room, onto pieces of paper, mass producing them, getting them into stores where people buy them and so forth. Well, what's Amazon doing to that? What's Amazon doing to just about everything? Now they're doing it to grocery stores. You know what the biggest grocery store in the US is? Anyone? Walmart, that's right. Walmart. And it might be Amazon one of these days. It wouldn't surprise me. So what's happening is this was the innovation in the early 20th century. We're going to make a lot of things that are exactly alike. We're going to make them really well. Cars, we're going to make tons and tons of cars. We're going to make televisions. We're going to make all this stuff, which is great. Then what happens? Everybody buys. Everyone's got a TV. Everyone's got a car. Everyone has a house. Now what? That's when we got marketing departments, right? Marketing departments come up because we have to now convince people to buy a new TV every year and get the biggest one. Like this one is really nice.
You need you need a new coffee every day. I just want to say.
What's that?
You need a new coffee every day.
Right, and that's a good thing. That's true. But so what's happened is when the environment is really volatile, when it's changing a lot, there's a new kind of organizational form that's emerging, and Amazon is really the poster child for it. That's a company that can be very, very flexible and adaptive and respond quickly to change. And today it's a blender, and tomorrow it needs to be a microwave oven. It can change. It can morph. And Amazon's very good at that. And we're not going to go into that because we have a whole book on it. But what we're going to go into, so this is sort of, I'll just describe quickly. It's more of a network. So in a divided company, you don't want these divisions talking to each other too much. You want them to focus on their task. But in a connected company, the jobs are more complicated, so they need to be talking to each other, and they need to be more connected. So you have a company organization that's a lot more networked. It looks a lot more like a network. And there's a whole book here that you can read on that. But one of the things that happened after this book came out is I started having people come to me saying, yeah, we get it. We want to be a more connected company. We're on the left of this picture, and we need to get over there to the right. What do we do? How do we do it? And I didn't have the answer to that in the book. The book was just sort of like, what is it? And that's when I started going back to culture. Because what happens over here is, and culture is simple, I'm just going to describe it. Culture is simply the habits that you form as a group over time. That's all it is. So family has a culture. Missouri, St. Louis has a culture. You can look at it at any scale. You can look at it as a team, a group within a company. You can look at it as the finance department, what have you. It's just simply the habits that we form over time. And when a company has, had 100 years to form a culture, you can't just decide one day that you want to change it and have people change their habits. And I said this to Chris the other day, and I said it to Tom earlier, started to say it. Trying to change the culture in a company is like, let's say there's 1,000 people in the company. It's like trying to get 1,000 people to quit smoking all at the same time. That's how hard it is. Or go on a diet or something like that. Asking 1,000 people to start doing, jumping jacks every half hour. jump up from, it's trying to change habits. It's incredibly difficult. So what I'm going to do is very quickly, I'm going to go through, I got interested in culture. I've been doing a lot of research on it. I've looked at a lot of the academic theory. I've actually tried the things that, some of the different things that people talked about in organizations, and I'm going to tell you the thing that works. In my experience, the thing that works best for understanding culture. First thing is, changing the culture kind of is a last resort. I mean, you know, you wouldn't want to try and change a culture if you didn't have to. It's sort of one of the most difficult things you're ever going to do. Like quitting smoking, which I have done. It's probably the hardest thing I ever did in my life. If any of you have ever quit smoking, probably you know what I'm talking about. There's a couple of researchers, and I'll write their names here. One is named Argyris, and one is named Shine. Argyris and Shine. One's at MIT, the other one's at Harvard. I'm not sure I can remember which is which, but they did a lot of research into organizational culture. And the research is basically, the approach that they took was not a sort of a template type of approach, or not like send out surveys and tell people what their culture is. They really took a kind of an anthropological approach. They studied organizational culture the way you would study any culture. You're going into the Amazon rainforest, something like that. They would go in and just start asking questions. And Shine has this thing that he uses to describe culture. He calls it the iceberg. So I'm just going to draw this big iceberg here. And so culture is like an iceberg. 90% of it is under the surface, never talked about, never discussed, just like a lot of habits. My wife told me recently that when I eat popcorn, we're watching a movie and I eat popcorn, I do something like this with the popcorn before I put it in my mouth. I had no idea. It's a habit, right? I had no idea that I did that. But that's what organizational culture is like. It's so it becomes so habitual and routine, and over so many years, the best people to understand a culture are the new people. There's the ones, and who's the least likely to tell you about problems with your culture? Well, it's the new people, because they're trying to fit in. But here's what the thing is. You know, we spend all of our time in companies talking about the stuff that's above the water. We never talk about the stuff that's below the water. And the stuff that's above the water is what's observable. Evidence. I call it evidence. Things that if a person came from Mars or a Martian, not a person, whatever they look like, and started looking around, stuff that they could see. Yeah, see, they could look at the way the office is laid out. They could look at the way people behave in meetings. They can look at the dress code. They can look where the kitchen is. They can look what's in the kitchen. Over here we have beer and wine and fun stuff in the kitchen, right? What is in your company's kitchen? That's evidence, okay? Other stuff is started all below this. And if you, basically, the stuff that is under here you can get to by asking why. Just keep asking why. And so I have developed a tool that uses Shine's iceberg but turns it into more of an organizational design tool, because I come from a design background, and I think that we can use design to change organizations, or at least to think about them better. And so I'm going to go through the different layers of my, it's a little bit of a modification from Shine. But down here we have what I would call levers, or or you could also say incentives maybe. Why do people behave the way they are? Why is the office laid out in the way that it is? Why does the boss have the corner office? What is it, everything that people do in a company, they do because it either makes their life less painful or they get rewarded for it somehow. I mean, culture is the operating system of a company. Just like my operating system was just telling me to change the colors, your company has an operating system, and it's just those habits and routines and behaviors. So you have these levers, these things that are there, and they were put there for a reason, but often they don't work as they're intended to work. Because what happens when people feel manipulated or controlled, when they see that there's a lever that's trying to control them, they either will, someone said to me recently, they'll gift or game it. So they'll game, basically the people, when people feel like they're getting a bonus based on the numbers, they'll just give you the number. That doesn't mean they're going to give you the result that you're trying to get. They'll give you the number. And they'll even fake the number sometimes, right? Or they will make excuses or whatever, so what have you. So these incentives don't always often they don't get you what you want, right? Incentives and levers in organizations. But this is important. This doesn't come from Shine, this comes from me, because this is the design space. This is the space that as an organization, you can be intentional about. You can't design the culture, but you can design the system of rewards, formal and informal, that give rise to the culture. So then you start asking, okay, well, why do we design the levers this way? Why is it that it works in this way? Well, we have things that we value in the company, things that we believe are important. That's why we put those incentives in place. Well, we think it's important that the salespeople sell stuff. So we give them a bonus. We give them a commission. Salespeople are going to get a commission when they sell something. And then we have below that, we sort of ask why we have the values. Why do we think these things are important? Down here you have beliefs, the core beliefs and assumptions. Well, the salespeople, we have to bonus the salespeople because at the core, we don't believe that customers would buy the product if there wasn't a salesperson. Let's say. The product's complicated. It needs a salesperson to explain it, right? Have you ever met an Amazon salesperson? Anyone? No. They don't need it, right? They made marketing. So here's what gets really interesting. Under the values part, there's actually two pieces here. And this is where it gets really interesting. There's what we say we value, and what we actually, in many cases, believe that we value. So that's what we might say stated beliefs, stated values. But then, when you compare those stated values to the evidence, you often get things that don't add up. And you all know this. I mean, you've all been in organizations, right? The boss says he has an open door policy, but you know what happens if you go in and you tell the boss something? He's going to go yell at your boss, and then it's going to come rolling back on you, right? So there's what's said is, we value your input, have an open door policy, come talk to me, right? But what's actually happens when you take that at face value and you go do it, you have a problem. Then so there's the acted values. And I'll give you one example from a company that I used to work with that I know pretty well, just Nokia, okay? And one of the things that I like to do is I start with the stated values, which you can usually find on the website, right, from a company. What's important to us? What do you say that we value? And you go to someone at Nokia and you say, what do you value? What do you value? Look at the website. Innovation. We value innovation. We're an innovative company. We value innovation. And you start asking people, okay, so you value innovation. And my tool is just basically the same thing, but it looks more like a spreadsheet. It's just sort of spread out so you can write on it easier than you can on an iceberg. And you say, okay, well, tell me what's some evidence for that? You know, well, look around. We have look at the museum in the lobby. We have all these innovations, and you go and you look to the lobby and you look at the innovations and you say, yeah, there is some cool stuff here, but it looks like about 9 out of 10 of these never actually got to the marketplace at all. Yeah, well, that's true. Well, yeah, so we invent a lot of things, but we don't actually launch a lot of them. Oh, really? You don't? Okay, so we invent, but we don't launch. Now, in my world, you don't launch. It's not an innovation, because an invention is a new idea, a new product, a new service. An innovation is when customers value it and want to pay for it and want to use it. So to me, that's not really innovation. And then you say, okay, well, why don't you launch stuff? You start asking why. Well, what are the levers? Why do you not get rewarded for launching stuff? What is it about the levers and reward systems in the company that keeps you from launching stuff? Well, we have all these different divisions. And, well, we have this other value. It's called consensus. So we have this other value where we all want to get along. So what happens is anyone can block something from getting launched. Oh, really? Okay. So that's another value. Was okay. Let's put that into the stated values. And we sort of triangulate. We go over here and go, oh, collaboration, consensus. Well, what happens is Nokia's got a belief. You just kind of dig down and go, so what do we really value? Well, we value security. I mean, it's very expensive to launch things. It's high risk. We have all these factories. We make these phones. We manufacture these objects that are costly to make. Once we make a commitment to manufacture something, it's very expensive, and you can get it. It's very risky. So the real value down below, you go, so what's the real value? Well, value's security and low risk. Well, you see how that's actually kind of not an innovative culture? See how that actually, it might be a good culture for innovation and manufacturing, but when Nokia tries to move into smartphone world, when they start competing with Apple and Google, this is clearly a problem, because they can't, if they're so risk averse that they can't launch stuff in the way that Apple and Google can launch stuff, they're going to have a real problem. And you go down here to the beliefs and you start digging into this, and you find that there's a lot of arrogance. There was a lot of arrogance in Nokia. They had, and as recently as 2008, they had 40% of the mobile phone market, even after the iPhone came out. So the thing was, really the biggest competitors perceived within Nokia were other groups in Nokia. That was really who people thought they were competing against. So culture, so this is kind of a sad story, right? Because we all know what happened with Nokia. And I would say this would be a case where it would be a mistake to even try to change the culture. The mistake, in my view, that Nokia made is not that they tried to change, that they couldn't change the culture. They did try to change the culture. The mistake was they would have been much better off changing their business strategy than changing their culture. They should have just stayed. They had such a great manufacturing company culture. There's no reason you shouldn't be able to run Android on a Nokia phone. There's no reason you shouldn't be able to run Microsoft on a Nokia phone. But they didn't want to do that. They're going to make their own. They decided that they were so strong that they were going to make their own operating system and compete with Google and Microsoft and Apple. And now you look over at a company like Samsung, very similar company, phone maker, made phones. They focused on the manufacturing side. They didn't try to compete. They sold parts. So they sold screens and so forth to Apple. You can buy a Samsung phone that runs Android, all the Google operating system. You can buy a Samsung phone that runs the Microsoft operating system. And they made one too. And the reason they made one was because they couldn't get Apple to agree to let them run the Apple OS on their phone, so they made a kind of an Apple copy. Okay? Now, I think that's Samsung has also got its issues coming up, but it's, I think, the highest market share phone company today. It's a good example of what you can do when you have a strong culture. Sometimes it might seem counterintuitive to go and make something completely different, do something completely different, but it actually might be easier in some cases to completely change what you're selling or what you're doing than it is to change the culture. It's like a culture, like I said about the culture being an operating system, in many cases it's a company's greatest asset. So it's a strategic thing. Sometimes, IBM's an example of a company that did. They were almost out of business. They brought in a customer who was the CEO of American Express to run the company, pissed off customer, and he really went to town on that culture. And you can read all about that in his book called Who Says Elephants Can't Dance? But anyway, the bottom line is, even he said, if I did not have to tackle IBM's culture head on, I would not have done it. It was his last resort, even for him. So, shall we talk about it? Like, this is making anyone's got neurons firing or thoughts that they want to share or questions? Yeah.
Actually, I was just talking to somebody this morning about the innovator's dilemma. About the innovator's dilemma, which is, if you're not familiar, simply put, is this idea that if you mix the new and the old together, the old will always win. And I'm just, have you given much thought to that concept as you're kind of applying the things you're talking about here?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that what happens is the old is usually on the defensive in the business world, and the new is on the attack. And what a lot of people, I think, that I'm talking to are feeling like, well, how do we compete with these swarms of startups that are just like three kids in a garage that are actually threaten our business model? And the people who are on the outside, who are in the technology side, the innovators, the swarms of startups, they don't realize how much actual power they have. And the people who are behind the walls of the large organizations are feeling extremely vulnerable. Like, we have this, I mean, it's like the emperor and no, what's the name? The Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. You know, they feel like, oh, you know, we could be only months away from all of our locations being for lease, right? We look important, we look big, but I think a lot of companies are feeling very vulnerable. They have their brands, they have their names, big names that people go to buy, but they see this rapidly shifting landscape. And I think what's happening, I mean, it used to be when I was you know, a teenager, the cool thing was to go try and have a band. But what's the cool thing now is to have a startup, right? It's like, and you know, and that's the thing is, like, a college kid doesn't have to make money at it necessarily, but they could take down, you know, then maybe not even realizing it. You know, this thing like Kodak, right? Kodak, billion-dollar company making film. They invented the digital camera in 1973, I believe, invented it. And they predicted, using Moore's law, which is, you're probably familiar with, it's called a technology curve of, you know, sort of how things get faster and cheaper and better over time. They predicted when digital cameras were going to be a thing. And yet they couldn't figure out, they just, it was like quitting smoking. Film was their smoking. They couldn't imagine, and even the CEO, I read a thing where he was saying, once, a previous CEO saying, well, our problem is that there's nothing as profitable as film that's legal. Well, you know, years later, the things that became as profitable, like Facebook, didn't exist then. Those things didn't start out as profitable as film. Nothing, even film didn't start out as profitable as film. So people are sitting on things where they have these rents, for lack of a better word, that they're extracting from the stuff that they've been selling. And they start to look, and you hear this in large organizations, you hear, well, we don't want to make a bet unless it's $1 billion bet. It's not worth it, our time, it's not worth our energy, which is about the stupidest thing that anyone could ever say. Because if you only make $1 billion bet that is a sure thing, you'll never make any bet. And it certainly won't win. I mean, there are things that are maybe worth putting money into, but they're not going to be billion-dollar profitable industries when they begin. You know, that's why I think because technology has gotten so cheap and so ubiquitous that anyone, you know, it's a pretty level playing field right now. Three kids in a garage can compete with a large organization because there's so many things. I mean, you can get 3D printers, you can outsource your manufacturing to China. I mean, there's so many, you know, all this stuff is readily available. You can actually go to Kickstarter, if anyone's familiar with it. You can actually go and get it funded. You can raise $1 million for your project from people, and they don't even have to get equity. You just promise them we're going to make a new camera, you know, and you'll get one if you pledge $200. And so this leveling the playing field. What happens is the three kids in the garage don't have the cultural baggage. They don't have the problem. They don't have this addiction to film or whatever their profitable thing is. The big companies, you know, you get an innovation in a big company and you start walking around. It's like, well, no, that's going to compete with our product. We can't do that innovation. That's going to, well, somebody else is going to do it if we don't do it. Right.
That's something that I think that the leaders of incumbent firms don't think about often enough, and with respect to that question. And Christensen talks in that book about a couple of examples of how that can be leveraged, right? This idea that, you know, if three kids in a garage can disrupt, you know, an industry, then why not divorce some of the innovation activity from the culture of the larger organization, right? You know, in fact, he has an interesting anecdote in there about, I think it's Woolworth, where he talks about how they went outside and, you know, created this. We were worried that this might happen because it happens about every 20 minutes all day long. But the Woolworth, you know, they they decided to experiment with the discount retail model, and more inventory turns, fewer people on the floor, kind of thing, and it worked, right? And then the CEO said, well, gosh, that works so well. We're going to bring it into the larger organization and realize all these gains in the whole organization. And of course, the old culture subsumed it, and before long, they had gone back to being the original, right, exactly, right. So yeah.
And then what happens is even when people fail, even when the 3 kids in the garage fail, right? They fail, then they go to start a new thing, and they recombine with 3 other people, and they've got a team though. They've figured out some stuff. They figured out how to move quickly and to do things, and they start another thing. And so that's part of what makes Silicon Valley so powerful is that when people fail, they have lots of other. There's projects at every stage going on all the time. So there's lots of friends that know each other well enough to know what they can do for each other. So your startup fails, you don't fall that far in Silicon Valley. Unless you're excuse the expression, an asshole, and everybody hates you. And assuming that you're good to work with and you're a good teammate, you got a place to go. You got oh well, we got this thing. It's called Instagram. Why don't you come over? Come over here. And why didn't Kodak do Instagram? Why not? I mean, they're about memories. They're about sharing. Culture. Culture's the reason. Culture's the reason.
It sounds like, too, it could have been where, one powerful division just didn't want to hear of it. I mean,
Well,
it's hard for me.
Instagram didn't look like $1 billion business,
Right.
even though it got sold for $1.5 billion after 2 years. 2-year-old company.
I say that about Blockbuster and Redbox, too.
Yeah.
It seems impossible to consider the notion that folks at Kodak thought that film would dominate forever. It's like they were
I
pretending.
don't think they thought that. I don't think they thought that. I think that what they were thinking, and this goes on in a lot of large organizations, what the top management was thinking was, I can retire before it's too late. They knew. But they thought, I'm going to get out. It's like a musical chairs. It's like, well, I'm going to get out before this thing.
I mean, that sounds like a much more comfortable situation for those soon-to-retire individuals than quitting smoking, as
Yeah,
we
hot
said.
potato is the game. That's the
Yeah.
one I'm thinking of. I'm not going to be the one hanging on to the hot potato.
Dave, you mentioned that when you were young, you wanted to start a band, and kids these days want to start, build apps. But the commonality there is the garage, right? Both are happening in a garage, and so I don't think there's as much generational changes as it is the magic of a garage. And so, which some of these companies,
So just get Kodak needs more garages.
some of the companies that are the most innovative realize they can't be innovative within their own brick and mortar, and they have to occupy space outside of the brick and mortar. They have to create a garage environment. And so the garage is like the metaphorical, laboratory that makes all creative things happen. Where you fail, you join other people that were in garage bands or garage apps and build something. Yeah. So the question I want to ask is, with regard to asking why and trying to dig deeper, what role does storytelling play in diagnosing the corporate culture and changing corporate culture? Because so much more can sometimes be derived through the metaphors people use in describing their organization because asking a why question sometimes is question answer, and a story, while it takes more to diagnose and discern, can provide more underlying truths about the organization in a subconscious sort of way.
Absolutely. And there's a guy, there's some work that came out of IBM on this, where they actually did a lot of storytelling and organizations stuff as a way to understand complexity and culture and what's going on. They don't define stories in the same way that you and I would define a story. A story is very much a snippet, like something people might say around the water cooler kind of thing. And especially in large numbers, when you get large numbers of groups, you ask people to tell stories about a situation or something, and then you ask them then to interpret their stories, and they categorize them. And in his case, he has some software where people actually interpret it along a triangular shape, where instead of sort of putting things along a spectrum, when somebody asks you, how was your customer experience, 0 to 10? You know what they want to hear, right? I mean, But if you ask someone something along a triangle instead of a spectrum and they don't really know what you want to hear, you get a better interpretation. So he uses triangles, and basically you can have well, do you think that this is about autonomy, or is this more about control, whatever those things might be? And people will actually map, after they tell the story, they'll map them along within a triangle. Then they can look and see, okay, what are the things that are common and dominant that a lot of people think? They have a way to quantify these stories. And what are the things that are kind of outliers? And they can look at, you can look at a big data set. That's interesting. That's interesting work. But it's also very expensive work to do, and it works better in a large organization as far as I can tell. What I've found is really powerful is to say, you ask people what they believe, what they believe and what they value, and then you start asking for evidence, and it starts being really interesting really quickly, really quickly. And I remember I was talking to an IT company, a Swiss IT services company, and I was talking to the HR person. Well, what do you value? What does it say on the website? What do you value? We value simplicity. Simple solutions to your IT problems. And then I asked, well, so what would you point to inside the organization about the way you work? What's observable that is simple? And she was like very quiet for a minute. And then she said, you know what? We value complexity. We make everything as complex as we possibly can. And you would be surprised how often that the stated value of a company, how often it's the opposite of how they behave and how they act. Maybe it wouldn't surprise you.
When we were
right. Yeah.
when we were planning for this, you talked about the idea of a general arriving on base, and what kind of.
I was going to ask you about that.
And
So
you'd given.
this is a story. I've been writing a new book on business agility, and this one has got me interviewing all kinds of interesting people. Military people, law enforcement, people who are working in very complex environments where they have to make things happen. And one of the guys that I spoke to was a U.S. strategist who had been in Iraq during pretty much the whole time there, and he talked about Petraeus, who was a general there during the surge, and how he would ask questions. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, it's the way he would ask the questions. And it was kind of like that triangle thing. When the commander comes down and says to the soldier, how you holding up, soldier? How you feeling? You feeling all right? Well, that's not a question that's going to get any kind of, he's not going to learn anything from that, because the soldier's going to say, most 99% of the soldiers are going to say, yes, sir. General, sir, it's great. And the general's not going to learn anything. But the way Petraeus asked questions was apparently was, you didn't know first of all, you didn't know he was coming until about a half hour. Oh, his helicopter's landing. Be ready. Here, he's coming. Then he would come and he would ask questions that you didn't know what he wanted to hear. You didn't know what the right answer was, basically. So he would ask questions like, well, what happened here yesterday? What are you trying to accomplish? What's standing in your way? What's stopping you from getting things done? And you didn't know. There's no right answer for that, right? So the easiest, simplest thing to do is just tell the truth. And this is a leadership quality that I'm finding in a lot of very strong, connected companies is, number one, the commander is on the battlefield. They're not isolating themselves, and this is a problem I think that was happening at Kodak and other companies. Connected leaders are talking to customers as much as they're talking to their own employees. They're out there. They're not. One of the problems with this hierarchy is when the situation becomes unstable, all the exceptions and situations start going up the chain of command because nobody feels like they have an answer. And so the people at the top are so overwhelmed just dealing with internal questions and situations, they don't have time to go talk to customers. They don't have time to go walk around the retail store. They don't have time to actually get a sense of what's really going on in the world. And this is where I talk about the monkey tree, I guess.
I think you should.
Yeah. The monkey tree is this metaphor for this hierarchical organization. And basically you can imagine it as a tree, with a bunch of monkeys on it, and the top CEO is the monkey at the top of the tree. And what happens is all this information, when the situation starts becoming less stable, all the information is getting filtered up through the monkeys. And every monkey doesn't want to piss off the monkey that's above him on the monkey tree. And so if you're at the top, all you get is good news. You never get bad news. Or you get sort of nice news. And the way that the description of the monkey tree is, if you're on the top of the monkey tree and you look down, all you see is smiling monkey faces. But if you're on the bottom of the tree and you look up, all you see is assholes. But this is the problem with that, with the hierarchical organization, right? Because what happens is, and this is why Petraeus was a good leader. I mean, he got in trouble later for some stuff. But, yeah. But this is why he was a good commander. He got his information filtered up through the monkey tree. He got a certain amount of information that came up to him through the traditional chain of command, but he was always out there checking it against what he could find out by going to the front line himself. And he was always triangulating between what he was hearing from the monkey tree and what he was actually sensing himself on the battlefield.
What I think is also interesting about that is that the kind of interrogation that you're talking about results in stories, right? Necessarily
That's
results
right.
in stories. And it also necessarily doesn't result in the kind of data that can be thought of as data in a quantitative sense, right?
Absolutely.
You're not getting stuff you can plot.
Story is the best tool for a leader to affect change in an organization. It has to be coming from the leader, and the leader has to be also walking the talk. But a story, I mean, that's the thing. If a leader is going around and is getting those stories from the battlefield, for lack of a better word, or the front line, sometimes we call it in business, they're learning stuff. And that stuff that they're learning gets translated into stories. And that leader becomes the best way, if you have a divisional organization, sort of disrespecting that chain of command and walking around and being like, is one of the best ways that you can actually start to affect cultural change. And that's what Gerstner did at IBM. He went out, he told the stories over and over and over, and he discovered all kinds of problems as he went. I mean, there was literally a guy who was in charge of Europe and Middle East. He was in charge of Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And he was sitting on a server, and if an email came from Lou Gerstner and he didn't like it, he would just delete it. He was like a gatekeeper of all emails from the CEO to Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Can you believe that? And this is the kind of stuff people do. This is the kind of way. This is the ways that they resist cultural change.
Right. I mean, it also seems poignant to me, this idea that leaders who employ the monkey tree as their primary means of accomplishing what they need to accomplish do so with the expectation that they have a manageable, controllable environment, not recognizing that they're constantly getting disinformation, right?
Right. The monkey tree wasn't designed to get information from the environment, really. It was designed for the leader to be able to give a command and have it executed
Right.
at scale. So what happens is, it works pretty well in that direction. Like for top down, works okay. But when you're trying to actually if you want to get real information coming up to the leaders, it doesn't work very well at all. I mean, because every time that information moves up a layer, it's getting niceified.
But the nice thing about stories also is the metaphors the metaphors they use in those stories tell you how they interpret the design, the values, and the beliefs, and it really reveals a lot about their behaviors within the organization,
Yeah.
which then can be, if they use a human cell as their metaphor to describe the organization, there's a lot more interdependence. If they're using, charging down the front lines and using more sports metaphors, and it's going to determine what their perspective is. And I think that, to me, that's one of the greatest values. If we're going to humanize organizations, we need to know what language the humans use in order to describe themselves, the organization, because that dictates their behavior in a very subconscious sort of way.
Yes, I mean, a story is a good way to sort of change the operating system, but it can also backfire, because if people perceive your stories as bullshit, then they will, the stories have to match their perceived reality.
Sure.
And that's one of the problems is, that a lot of times companies will say, hey, we're going to change the culture. And we're going to have a big event. We're going to have a big 2-day off-site. We're going to all get some sticky notes. We're going to talk about the culture that we want to have. We're going to have all this, and we're going to have balloons. And Mick Jagger's going to be there. We're going to change the culture. And then what happens is they go through this exercise, and they got the stories, right? And they got all this stuff figured out. But then it comes time to the levers, and they're like, we're not going to change any of the incentives. We're not going to move any of the departments around. We're not going to actually monkey with the monkey tree at all. We're not going to change it at all. And so what people hear is blah, blah, blah. Yeah, here we go again. You know, same old, same old. They might change a couple of the monkeys at the top, but they haven't actually changed the tree. It's still a tree. It still looks exactly the same to anybody who's in the monkey tree. It looks exactly the same. And that's why the levers piece to me is so important. If you actually want to, if you describe the culture and you can describe the behaviors and the things that you want, how can you reward those things and also sometimes even punish the things that are running contrary to that? And if you say everybody's equal, but you say, you know what, this guy's too important for us to lose and he's not walking the culture talk, or this person is not, you know, but they're my cousin. So they're still going to be VP, even if they're not doing it. You know, so it's not going to. Everyone knows that. Everyone's going to see that. Everyone understands that. You know, when you're a leader in an organization, they notice all that stuff, and you may be able to talk yourself into, well, it's okay. I mean, you know, but it's not. I mean, you're not going to get change happening.
So Dave, I mean, this issue of change at an organizational, at a team, tribal, societal level even is, you know, it's a human problem that is especially acute right now given our rate of change and things that are going on and the complexity in the world. And, you know, listening to you talk about it, the examples that you've given, I think at least maybe a part of that problem is kind of rooted in human nature's conservative approach to the environment we're in, and especially when you've had a history of success, right? In your Nokia example, and in, you know, the IBM example, and in, you know, Apple before Steve Jobs came back, and in,
Sure.
you know, Microsoft. Certainly, I mean, the sort of arrogance that comes from success. Why should we even undertake the pain of change is rooted in, you know, it's almost like our past success is the enemy of our willingness and our motivation to change. So I'm curious about your thoughts about to what degree even the whole issue of culture change sort of runs up against this conservative bent in human nature. If we have something that's worked in the past, why take a chance? Why mess with that? And kind of attached to that, I'm also interested in your thoughts about, I mean, I don't hear about it much anymore, but William Bridges did a lot of work a few years back on transition. And all the talk about change, you can describe a change instantly, but he was trying to make the point that you needed to attend to the human dimension of transition that included ending the old way of doing things and going through a space of not quite knowing how to grab onto the new thing.
Liminal,
And then
yeah.
celebrating and rewarding and incentivizing the adaptation of the new thing, and that change was this process of transition. And that was the way to connect with sort of human nature, in a sense. Thoughts?
Where to begin? I mean, that was a long one. So maybe you could just hit the bullet points again for me.
Well, when we talk about change, it seems like it's hard for humans to change.
Yes.
Because we love what works. And
Even though people do like change, I mean,
yes,
in
but
their personal lives.
organizationally,
I mean, I like
yeah.
a new phone. I like a new TV.
Yeah. So our success becomes the enemy of our motivation
Yeah,
to change.
let me hit that one first.
Yeah.
Yes, any company that's been around for 100 years that's still around is not around because it's around because it was successful. It's around because, and those habits and routines and that have formed were very successful, and they were successful for a period of time. But at the same time, so culture is like the operating system, right? If you put any one of us into Nokia, pretty soon we would start behaving the way everyone was behaving at Nokia. It's not like we would change that culture. Culture is so strong, it's like a river, you know. And I've talked to a woman who's done a lot of research in culture, way more than I have. She was using organizational culture as a term before anybody even had that term. But she said to me, that was one of her first epiphanies, was she saw someone who was really in a poisonous culture, and they were acting in a poisonous way, and it dropped them into a great culture, and suddenly they, like almost overnight, their behavior would change. And she started to realize the power of it. So yeah, change is hard. Success is one of the big, Gary Hamel tells the story of the U.S. automotive industry. I think it was General Motors when he was working with them, and they talked about the threat coming from Japan, Toyota. And there's a lot. The thing is that it's easy to sort of discount things, and so he asked them, why did it take 30 years for you to figure out, to actually address this threat? And the guy said, well, we first saw the numbers coming out of Japan, and we thought, it's impossible. Couldn't be. Numbers must be wrong. These numbers, this is not possible even through any laws of physics that we know. Then they went, and then that was 5 years. That can't be possible. And 5 years later, they're still getting the numbers. Then they went to visit Japan. They went to tour the factories, or some of them did. Okay, then it's possible, but only in Japan. Couldn't ever do it here. Couldn't ever do it here with U.S. workers. Another 5 years goes by. Toyota starts opening manufacturing facilities in the U.S. They start making them over here. And they're like, well, those numbers got to be wrong. Can't be doing it. It's not possible here in the U.S. It's like you keep cycling through this stuff, right? You've seen this. I mean, we've seen this in organizations. When we've been successful in the past and the situation changes, we're the last ones to recognize that the situation is changing because we know we have these things that work. They've worked so well. Of course they're going to continue to work. There's a guy named Hal Moore. Some of you may have heard of him. He's a general in Vietnam. He's one of the first helicopter generals. They made a movie about him with Mel Gibson. But he talks about, he says, when everything's going great, then everything's going great except that everything's going great. And that's a military leader's perspective on it. When everything's going great, it's probably an ambush, right? When everything's going great in the military world, if it's going perfectly, something is probably wrong. And that's and that's, I think that's a good thing for leaders to be thinking about is, if you're seeing numbers and they don't seem to make sense, that's the stuff you do want to be paying special attention to. That's the stuff you want to be investigating and getting going, digging into that. And when you have two experts and they disagree, that's the stuff you want to be like, okay, let's talk about it. Let's not figure out who's right, because maybe these are two perspectives, points of view on a situation. And because they're experts, they've been around for a long time, they got good at this. Because they're experts, they're probably looking at things through an old lens. Maybe there's something actually new here. Maybe that's why they disagree. And so there's a lot of this stuff over here is about being able to make sense, try and understand situations, but also have your organization organized in such a way that it can adapt more quickly than this is a sort of a machine type of way of organizing a group of people. And this is a more like a kind of a little bit more organic.
So at the risk of being a devil's advocate, I'm going to throw something out there.
Yeah.
So what you're describing on some level is that humans are kind of foolish. We tend to get into habits. They're difficult to change. There's a lot of mob mentality and behavior in organizations where the culture, like a river, pulls us along. And individual people who try to disrupt that often find that very difficult to do. And then maybe there's more requirement on leaders to be the disruptive forces. However they go about gathering the information or determining the alternate reality that they'd like to impose, that to be more human would be to be more, inactive, to be more less action, less disruption. So I'm kind of struggling with the concept here.
Why do you say to be more human?
Well, so it sounds like a lot of companies are very human.
Because they don't like change.
Yeah, they don't really want to change.
Yeah.
Even at the risk of being totally contrarian, that social networks are often somewhat ineffective and vile. There's some great things I agree about the
Echo chambers.
Yeah, or just I don't watch my wife and her friends and Facebook and the texting, and there's a lot of gossip. There's a lot of negativity. There's a lot of lying and backstabbing. There's a lot of stuff there that's
very
in
human.
that network, right? That's very human.
Don't be human project.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
So in some ways, I sense a call here for, it's more really about identifying a mechanism or a methodology by which a leader can, like you said, walk the talk. can identify the things in the culture that need to change, and then perhaps rather than just appeal to the humans, to somehow model and disrupt this deliberately.
Well, you know, McLuhan says, right, that we shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us, right? And so, so yeah, the role of leadership is in making some determination about what the tools are going to do to the people, right? And so this is, you know, so that it speaks to the design question. You know, you make design decisions, especially earlier in the process, and then those over time affect they help to set the seeds for what kind of culture is going to be present. And so really, to my mind, the question about being human, and yes, right, I mean, humans do all kinds of terrible things, and we're not implying any of those things when we say that we want organizations to be more human. What we're saying is that we want to think about people and the effect that the decisions we make about the tools that we build, the cultures that we build, what that will have on the behavior of the people who are participating in those systems. You know, like Dave's example of the person who acts in a poisonous way in a poisonous environment and doesn't in a not poisonous environment. Are we building into the structures that we build when we build our organizations the expectation that people are going to act badly, right? And that people can act badly in social networks is in no way an indication of the idea that it's not right for us to be considering other ways to think about constituting organizations, right? I mean, people act badly within top-down hierarchies as well. In fact, the sad thing about it is that if the people who are acting badly are near the top of the hierarchy, then the effect is going to be felt throughout the entire thing, right? So, you know, let me put it this way. So I love macroeconomics and, you know, spend a lot of time arguing with economists, which, you know, probably lowers my reputation with everyone in the room. It can be very boring, but I get a lot of sort of enjoyment about talking with sort of Keynesians who will say things about the economy at large, like, hey, you know, why can't we just manage the economy the way you manage the inside of business, right? I mean, you have central planning and you have budgets and all these things. Why can't we just do that with the economy at large, right? And my response is that I think you've got it precisely backward, right? We don't want to make the market look more like the inside of business. We want to make the inside of business look more like the market, right?
Well, that's what the Soviets did, isn't it?
Right.
They tried to run a country the way you would run a business.
Right.
5-year plans, divisions. You're in charge of agricultural machines. You're going to do screws. And what happens? I mean, it was a terrible disaster, right? And lots of organizations are terrible disasters when you look inside. And I think what's going on here, we haven't actually hit on it too much, but what's going on here is a hierarchical, multi-divisional company is human, but it's like a dictatorship is human. I mean, it's a control structure. A connected company like Amazon is actually run more like a city, where the company provides the infrastructure and people make their own decisions. They have a lot more autonomy. Even for example, Amazon Marketplace, good example of a company. Amazon provides a platform. You can sell your stuff. My mom sells my dad's old computer books on Amazon. Why someone would buy 1970 computer books? Don't ask me, I don't know, but they do. And she has an Amazon seller account. And she doesn't even have email. She was able to get on there and set it up using my dad. My dad gets the emails and he prints them out for her, literally. But she's selling stuff on Amazon because so they've made it possible. And this is what you look at a lot of these connected companies are doing. Facebook, another example, you know, is Facebook's a content media company and we provide all the content for free. We provide everything that they sell is provided by us. We don't even work there. We don't get paid. We provide everything. The audience, the content, all the movies, all the images, all the status updates, all the photos.
None of us have supervisors or managers
right.
or work within departments.
Right. And so, yes, so the idea for me, when I think of being more human, I think of it as just a difference in the sort of the organizing. This is what I mean when I talk about a difference in the organizing structure. Like, this is what I mean by levers. You know, the levers are going to be very different if you want to create like a a commercial zoning district that lets people be entrepreneurial, even in the people who are doing the development of the Amazon website, people who actually do work at Amazon, they have a lot of autonomy. You know, someone thought search inside the book would be a good idea, and they recruited a couple of buddies, and they said, let's do search inside the book. You know, and that's possible because of the way they've created the infrastructure within that company, where people actually have mobility. They can try a thing, they can fail, and they can move. It's almost like a little Silicon Valley inside of that company. And if you talk to web developers who work there, they'll talk about.
I have a quick question on Amazon. When are they projected to make money?
Exactly, yeah.
I would be happy. I've got a lot of Amazon stock, okay? And I would buy more. I bought Amazon stock at $12 a share. You know what it is now? About 330, something like that. Why is Amazon? And this is for me as a failure of Wall Street to understand Amazon's business model. What's happening with Amazon is they are making tons of money, and they are also expanding at the same time. So their margins are small, or even sometimes negative, because they are building warehouses. I mean, they're in major growth mode. Amazon is expanding to cover the globe. So, I mean, a lot of investors do say, well, when is Amazon going to actually turn a profit? But if you actually go back and look at the initial letter to shareholders when they first launched the company, Jeff Bezos said very clearly, we're not going to run the company on a quarter-to-quarter.
It's been 11 years, though.
Yeah.
They haven't made any money. I mean, it has been 11 years. So, I mean, eventually they're going to have to show something. They're going to.
Yeah.
I mean,
the
business model eventually is going to run out of steam if you run out of Amazon.
You don't think Amazon's going to make money?
I've looked at their balance sheet, and that's another. I don't want to bore this room with it, but I have a hell of a time finding it. You know, they're operating. Well,
What's their annual revenue?
Oh God, I haven't.
You looked at the balance sheet.
Well, a year ago, I guess it was some 28 billion or something.
Okay. All right. What are their expenses are roughly the same? Let's say.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So do you think Amazon will be able to cut expenses such that they can be highly profitable on 28 billion if they wanted to cut expenses? Amazon's coming out with a phone probably in June. They came out with a Kindle. They basically, what is a Kindle? It's about a $199 Amazon store. You buy it.
No, I mean, they sell things at dumping prices and they ship it for free.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they've won the market. Oh, sorry.
So-
It's really not the discussion.
No, this is awesome. This is why you're here.
This is the discussion.
I mean, I think I would go back and just, on the human level, I'm going to step off of that for a second. And I will just, one comment I would like to make is, and then you were sort of touching on it.
Can we still go to the roof if we want?
Don't go near the edge.
I think if we're looking at this century and tonight, the real question is, and it was brought on the human, is if we're giving away our soul, if we're giving away our mysteries, if we're giving away our imaginative for free, and it is now a vassal to these large servers in quantitative math at high algorithm structure. You know, the valuation of human value in 20 years from now is in question. Just as I look at the Amazon structure of what they're doing to all the variety of which they sell at a very low cost, and they're taking that information, that data. Amazon looks like they're collecting a massive amount of data.
Yeah.
And they're selling a lot of product at near broke, but really what they're doing is collecting data. And they're collecting your habits, they're collecting your impulses, and they're running the others out. And all these people on Facebook and every other kind of information system is giving away for free. Mm-hmm. So the question that, you know, on the human is, will we own our imagination, or are we going to be a vassal to this technology? And I think this question is going to be alarming to the younger and younger generations who may not be able to discern the difference.
Just 10 years ago, the idea that the average person could easily create a piece of art and distribute it to an extraordinarily large number of people, especially somebody who had only the resources available to them of access to a computer with a connection to a network was not nearly just 10 years ago, wasn't nearly as profound as it is now, precisely because of things like Facebook. Right, so I think that there is a profound. I mean, I hear and acknowledge the validity of the point that you make, and the counterpoint I think is that at the same time, people in the aggregate are more creative and sharing it with larger audiences with less expense on their part than ever before.
Well, I would like to ask the question: who owns the servers? Really, who owns it? Who has the data?
Of all.
That's given away every day. Every person
yeah,
in the room
well,
is giving your
Yeah,
data.
Facebook owns it.
Who
Google
owns
owns
it?
it. You're right. Facebook.
Who controls the data?
Google.
The NSA, right? Yeah, right.
Oh, yeah, that was a big, that was,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
So your point isn't that you don't think that Amazon will make money. Your point is that they're sort of lying about what their real business model is. That they are the way that they will eventually be making money is off the data, not off the.
It's the same model as Facebook. It's
Yeah.
the same model of all. So the real question is to the human question. Do we own our own imagination? Well, who are we going to be in 20 years? And particularly those at a demarcation line of our children and children's children.
I have a
mean,
thought on
that's
it. I have a thought on it. I mean, and I think it's how it's going to play out and how long it's going to take is going to be a very open question. But I mean, roads used to be privately owned. I mean, roads used to be, you'd have someone at the toll booth taking, sometimes with a sword, right, extracting a rent for you to use the roads. And we're sort of on the verge of the telcos sort of being in that situation where they own the roads that this stuff is moving across. And this is starting to become, I think eventually all the stuff will be publicly owned. That's what I believe. I think it may take 100 years. Yeah, it may take a long time. But I think eventually that stuff is going to be critical enough that we won't let private, looks like roads, highways, we won't let private companies own it. And we will get pissed, like you are already. We'll get pissed off enough. And I think we will take that stuff public in the same way that I think soon Wi-Fi will start to be a municipal service that's provided to the taxpayers by the cities, just like snowplows and stuff like that. We'll pay for it with our taxes. I think it's headed in, you can already see telcos starting to head in that direction, which is why I don't have a lot of my stocks invested in telcos. But maybe that would be good.
It's not I'm pissed off. I just see when things are given away for free, there's obviously a cost. And,
well, someone said, I mean, I've heard people say this, and you probably have too, that if you're using the product for free, you are the product.
Mm-hmm. It's also understanding where the locus of value is, and you just said it yourself, right? I mean, the big revelation that Google had, right, was recognizing. I mean, they could have put a toll on the front of the search engine. Each search is a thousandth of a penny or whatever it is, but they recognized that the locus of value was not in collecting a toll at the gate. It was in the knowledge about what people would search for, like you say.
Exactly.
Right, that's where the real value is.
Yeah, Google's an interesting one because they've always had this sort of smug catchphrase, "Don't be evil," But
Right.
I think they're really struggling with that. They're going to continue. They're going to struggle more and more with that. And I think your point is fair that it's one thing to say that people inside these companies have autonomy and they're developers and they can have a lot of fun and they can do great work and they're doing creative work and they are doing imaginative work. But at the same time, some of us are becoming cattle, that they are hurting, right? That we are becoming the product. And I do think it's important that we at least be aware of it. I mean, I'm an optimist. I do think that
Things change rapidly,
and I do think that eventually, we have the power in a democracy. I think eventually we will take a lot of that stuff and it will become it'll be like infrastructure, just like, you have the power companies. They're sort of private, but they're regulated. We're not going to get ripped off buying power, probably too much, right? I mean, you have, I think that this stuff will move in that direction, like utilities and, public utilities and that kind of thing, where maybe they'll be hybrid, but I think they're going to I think that's how I see it playing out in the long run.
We want to take one.
Oh, yeah,
one
okay,
final question.
I'm bringing it in a totally back to a different direction, although I really enjoyed that myself. So getting back to the monkey tree. Well, I'm sure everybody here has a story like this. I was part of a company, and they were going to do this whole corporate culture change, and I'm a creative, so I got on the new mission statement, and we spent 9 months hammering out the mission statement, and all these other changes are going to happen, and none of it happened except the mission statement, which everybody forgot after day 2 it was launched. But the other part of that is it's good to be the king, it's great to be the monkey in charge, but can you say a little bit about, we all say we want autonomy, but that requires a lot more responsibility as an employee, as somebody lower on the tree. Have you found in your experience that people really open up and embrace that? Or getting back to what he was saying about the bad part about being human, do we secretly enjoy just standing at the coffee machine for an hour and a half and saying we don't understand and all those other things?
Well, I could go on for a long time, but certainly it's easy to hide. It's easier to hide in a big company and not work, really, or not. It's easy. It's relatively easy to hide. That's one thing. Number 2, it's nice to be able to say, well, my boss told me to do that.
Yeah.
I don't care if it was, I know it was stupid and it was wrong, but I did it because my boss said to do
I was
it.
following orders.
I was following orders, exactly, yeah. So that's also easy to do. It's also hard when someone says to you, well, be creative. Well, number 1, what does that mean? Number 2, well, if I'm creative and I'm successful, I'm sure you'll take credit for it. But if I'm creative and I'm not successful, is my head going to be the one that's going to be chopped? So it has to do with what I believe. The organization will actually put not just the talk, but the walk behind. And so there's a lot of that is like, what should I, you're saying that you want us to start being creative and taking risks, but what will happen if I really do that? That said, every large organization that I have ever been in the last few years has sleeper cells in it of real innovators who are just ready to go. And they're biding their time, some of them. They're politically not stupid. They're not going to, they're waiting for the moment. But there's all kinds of energy just waiting to be unleashed in every large organization that I've ever worked with. And it's just a matter of, people have to believe that that stuff is possible, that will be rewarded, that it's not going to get them fired. And that's not something that happens overnight. But even when people, even at the risk of being fired, there are people who are doing things, even knowing. There are people who are doing things, I know this is right for the organization, so I'm doing it. And they are even risking their jobs. I mean, there's almost like revolutionary heroes inside these organizations, and some of them get promoted, some of them get fired, some of them get promoted, but there are. I mean, and here's the thing. If everybody in the company knows what needs to happen, but it's not happening, that's a culture. That's culture. That's a culture problem. And this is the case in a lot of organizations. Everybody knows that something needs to happen. Maybe not exactly what, but everybody knows that something needs to change, and yet it's not changing. And I think that's something that we all have to take responsibility for at some level. I mean,
David, the majority of those sleeper cells in the triangle and not over in the more connected.
Well, they're overt over there.
yeah, I'm talking about these kind of companies right now.
So, I mean, over on the right, there is no sleeper cell. Everyone, it should not like
Oh,
that.
there might be. But they're sort of, they don't need to be subversive. They don't need to be hidden so much necessarily.
The incentives over here that are outside of the granular mechanical, like fiat incentives, like you will be punished if you do wrong or you will be rewarded if you do right. The only other incentives are completely abstracted, right? The better of the company, for the betterment of the company to do, but they don't have a whole lot of teeth or a lot of purchase with individuals in a way that speaks to their humanity, right? Whereas in an organization like this, even if it's very large, right?
Like this.
Right. Yeah, like this.
A blob.
Like this blob, right? In that kind of organization, the interdependencies that exist between people become a profound incentive for good faith, right? You know, I mean, I'm going to do right if I'm, you know, you were talking about how easy it is to hide in a large organization. Well, if the large organization is composed of dynamic small organizations, right, then one profound incentive for me as a participant in that is that I don't want to let down the people that I work with all the time.
See, and that's an accountability issue, and I really believe part of the problem, whether it's, you know, in a big organization, the accountability, they measure it, and of course you have the levers, and the measurements are all wrong.
Right.
And the dilemma, I think, in a more entrepreneurial approach, is that it's hard to identify the levers. It's hard to know, how do you incentivize people? How do you make people accountable? And a lot of times I think it's accountable to each other, rather than accountable to some mathematical formula that's going to get you a bonus.
Yeah, Thomas.
Because I think sometimes you're disincentivizing some of the very people that might be the change.
Right.
They may really help you in making that change. And also, you have to ask yourself, who's really inventing these levers in the first place? In the past, it was the guys up at the top. Once you have this other type of an organization, how are those things happening? And if they're looking at the past to make the levers, then it's retroactive, and you're still looking back. You're still incentivizing people for the very wrong reasons.
Thomas.
So I think, to me, the big dilemma with either one of these still comes back to accountability. And I frankly think that accountability is a soft thing, and it shouldn't be a hard thing. It shouldn't be something that's a measurable accountability. And I know that probably sounds totally wrong.
No, I was going to say Tom Kuhn, right, wrote this book called The Structure of Scientific Revolution that talks about, he was the guy that popularized the phrase paradigm shift. One of the things he talks about in there is the idea of incommensurability, that when paradigm change is happening, that there's this incommensurability problem where the advocates of the new paradigm and the advocates of the old paradigm can't speak, they talk past one another because they use the same language, but they mean radically different things. So an Einsteinian physicist talking to a Newtonian physicist about gravity, right? They're both saying gravity, but they mean profoundly different things by it, right? And I think that the word accountability is you know, right in the middle of an incommensurability problem with the change that we're experiencing right now. That accountability in the old model is all about you know, carrots and sticks, right? Can I punish you or can I reward you? That's what accountability is about. In the new model, it seems to me that accountability is about my relationships with the people with whom I work on a regular basis, right? You know, not am I going to get punished, but am I punishing the people I care about?
There's a lot of evidence in
This is going to be really good, right?
No. It's actually old school, but I wonder if you can comment on. I think there's this old school thinking of the social contract within the corporate ranks of how a company treats its employees, treats its customers. That relationship has changed. The social contract has changed now. What is the social contract today, or is there one?
that companies have with their employees?
Yeah.
Good question. You have an answer?
No, I don't have an answer, but I'd like to build on that
Yeah.
question, because I think the dehumanization has happened during the Industrial Revolution. Because what you were basically telling people is, you know what, check your brain in at the door. We want you to work on
And your emotions.
this, right, and we want you to work on this particular widget, and we want you to do that perfectly. Because what we were basically saying is, don't think, don't care, just come
Right.
in here and do this every single day.
And you'll have a job.
Right.
And you'll have a job for an extended period if you do as we say.
Yeah.
But then, when you think about what's happened in the world, and we think about what humans are, and when we say, how do we define be human? How do you define that? I mean, some of what we've talked about here is about people being very unhappy in their work environment, not being satisfied, coming in, checking off the box, and going home and getting a paycheck.
Right.
But, you know, what does it mean to be human? I mean, what do we want to do every day that we go in? Do we want to make a difference? Do we want to make an impact? Do we want to contribute in a way that leaves a legacy where people know we were here? And I think that's really, in essence, what it's about, right? It's about what do we want to leave behind? And I think that when you live in that hierarchy, you live in a world of monkeys, right? Which is
Yeah.
a great analogy. But it's about how do you bring that whole person in every day? How do you engage them at the highest levels? And how do you bring about discretionary effort? And today's economy, you want people to be 100+% there because they're leaner, right? Organizations, we have fewer people doing more things, but we want the whole person there. And I think that's what this is about for me. And I think that, we've kind of lost our way
Well, to steal
as an
Dan
organization.
To steal Dan Pink's phrase, being human has got to at least be that we're not better smelling cattle.
I agree.
Yeah.
I definitely agree.
Yeah, and I think that is the emerging social contract, and there's devils in this details of this one too, which is bring your whole self to work. We want all of you. We want you to care about the work that you're doing. And there's the downside of this is a lot of people checking their email all weekend and not having their work be they care so much about it that they can't ever let it go. I might be in that category. But there's like this idea that that's not necessarily all roses either. And I don't think the contract is you'll have a job for life necessarily. But part of the contract is you bring your whole self to work, you care, you will have meaningful work, you will enjoy your work, and you'll be building skills that will translate to whatever that next thing might be, whether it's here or somewhere else. So, and I think the contract is that, or maybe should be, this might be my idealist self talking, but the contract should be, bring your whole self to work, care, be a good teammate, work with us on something that we collectively care about, that we have passion for, and let's see what happens. Let the chips fall where they may. We will give you the space and the infrastructure that allows you to do that. We'll probably own whatever creative, great, imaginative things you come up with. But you'll also be building capability. You'll be building relevant skills that you'll be able to take wherever else you want to go.
What's so ironic is we just, this is also simple, both in terms of being human, and also in survey after survey, it's never, number one, the employee wants to raise, number two, the employee wants the promotion, but number one is always, I want to matter, I want to be respected, I want to feel like I'm contributing.
Sorry.
So it feels like it's,
I stopped recording.
yeah.
Sorry.
It seems we might be able to sit here all night and chat about this, but instead, let's go stand in there and have a few drinks and chat a little bit more and continue the conversation. Thank you,
Before
everyone.
you leave, let me just say one thing.
Yes.
Thank you all so much. This was an incredible conversation, in no small part because you're all incredibly smart and bold people who are willing to call us out, Mr. Schlafly. No, but
I didn't know I did.
no, I'm kidding. No, thank you very much. Thank you.
Everyone.